Hey guys, welcome to Digit.in, and today we're going to be talking to you about the VIVO X60 Pro, not the Pro Plus, the Pro. Lots of interesting things about this phone. As usual, every review I do is about interesting things about interesting devices, and this is going to be no different. Pardon the interruption, but before we move forward, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel, and of course also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. Now that you've done the basics, let's proceed. First off, the specs. Now this phone is a fairly special device. It's powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 870 chipset. Qualcomm has been diversifying its portfolio significantly. Like we saw, it used to be 4, 6 and 8 series. Then within the 6 series, there were multiple chipsets, and now within the 8 series, we're seeing multiple chipsets. The 870, for the uninitiated, is essentially a overclocked version of the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865. Same cryo, so it's got the same Cortex A77 based cores as the 865 Plus, but the Prime core has a higher clock speed. A few other changes as well, but we'll get into that in the performance section. The unit that we have comes with 12 gigs of LPDDR4X memory. It's got 256 GB of UFS 3.1 storage, a gorgeous 1080p display with 120Hz refresh rate, and of course it's got an incredible camera stack, 48 megapixel primary camera sensor, and there's a lot going on with it. It's got gimbal, so Vivo's gimbal stabilization version 2.0, and of course it's also doing pixel shift to get you some very impressive colors, but we'll talk more on that later. There's also an ultra wide camera and a telephoto one. So overall, lots to talk about, so let's just dive right in. The performance on the VIVO X60 Pro is actually very much in line with what you'd expect from a flagship smartphone. Going over synthetic benchmarks, we see that these numbers fall below the Snapdragon 888 but way above the 865. For example, when looking at the Antutu score for the OnePlus 9 and the OnePlus 8T, which are powered by the Snapdragon 888 and 865 respectively, the VIVO X60 Pro sits squarely in the middle thanks to its Snapdragon 870 chipset, which is pretty much where it's supposed to sit in anyway. In fact, we see this behavior across practically every benchmark that we ran, which is Geekbench 5, Mobile Expert Suite, 3D Mark Wildlife, and even GFX Bench. So when you consider the synthetic performance of this chipset, you do see that yes, it is higher than the Snapdragon 865 but below that of the Snapdragon 888. A no-brainer. However, where does that lead you in real life? And that's where it gets interesting. Now, gaming on this phone, gaming being one of the most taxing things you can do on a smartphone these days, COD Mobile running at its highest graphics settings, Asphalt 9 running at the highest graphics setting possible, which unlocks the 60 FPS mode. We see that both of these games are able to maintain their peak frame rates of 60 FPS as the median frame rate, and a stability of 98% for COD Mobile and 99% for Asphalt 9. These numbers are impressive, but let's take into context where the OnePlus 8T stood, which was a very similar number, 60 FPS median and 100% stability on COD Mobile and 98% stability on Asphalt 9. The stability numbers will vary from every run, but they don't go beyond 1 or 2 percentage points. The OnePlus 9 also has the same behavior, 60 FPS on both the games and a fairly high stability as well. So that makes you wonder, we've got all of this performance, all of this power packed into these SoCs, so much RAM being baked into the phone. Are we even able to take advantage of it? Well, maybe not today, but that's where these chipsets come into play maybe 1 year, 2 years from now on. As we start moving towards maybe heavier fidelity gaming, that's where you get it. But it really does come down to app developers to take advantage of this hardware. As of now, there really isn't much you can do that will really stress out the hardware on these phones. So with that regard, if you were to buy the VIVO X60 Pro today, you would be set at least for the next 2 years with respect to performance. So there's that. In daily usage, while gaming, while watching movies, while browsing the web, just doing general research, and having used this phone as my daily driver for some time, there's not really any complaints. You don't feel the phone getting warm, it doesn't heat up as much, nothing out of the ordinary. We've started to hit summer, so there is that little bit of warmth going on when you start gaming on it, but not at all uncomfortable. Honestly, zero complaints with respect to performance, because I think we've come to a point where hardware has far gone beyond what the software is actually capable of. So it's time for the software to catch up. So there's that. With the performance out of the way, let's talk cameras, and this one is something that I'm actually very excited to talk about. Vivo has a partnership with Zeiss, which results in some pretty impressive optics. But that's not it. Vivo by themselves have also developed this gimbal-based stabilization for their primary camera. Think of it like a sensor shift stabilizer, but well, slightly better, I guess. Here's what it is. We've seen what the X50 could do last year, and the X60 Pro does it better. The stabilization on this thing is very impressive. We'll show you some samples where you can see exactly what it's like to use this camera with and without stabilization. That's one. Second thing that Vivo has really put some thought into is something called their pixel shift technology. Now what they're doing is essentially they're shifting their primary 48 megapixel sensor by a pixel in each direction in order to capture all three of the primary red, green and blue colors in all their glory. Now this technique has been used on DSLRs to generate images of higher resolution. It's called super resolution mode. We've seen Fuji do it, Panasonic, Sony, everybody's tried it out. But this is one of the first on a smartphone. And while Vivo is not using it to boost resolution, they are using it to boost color accuracy on the smartphone. It also results in better light pickup, but the downside is longer shutter speeds. Now, all of this technology that goes into making a great smartphone, none of it is worth anything if it's not working seamlessly. And that's something that the VIVO X60 Pro actually manages to achieve. Fire up the app, tap on the subject, and you're good to go. The photos coming out of the VIVO X60 Pro, one, the shooting experience is actually really good because well stabilized lens, really fast and really responsive camera app, which is something that I had a problem with on the OnePlus 9 Pro. The camera app was a little sluggish. Hopefully they're going to fix it on a camera update later, but we'll see when that happens. The Vivo app does not have that experience. The images by themselves when we're shooting in the bin mode are actually quite impressive because they've got the right balance of contrast to dynamic range, so you're not seeing any crushing of shadows when you're shooting in tricky lighting conditions. If you're shooting in simple lights or diffuse lighting, you're going to get gorgeous images to begin with. Then from the primary camera, if you move from good light to low light, you have ultra low light mode, which again produces very impressive frames. And the detail retention surprisingly is not that bad. Like, you can still read text properly. It's not a smudgy mess. And needless to say, it's fairly usable. Plonk it on a tripod and you'll see the shutter times increase even further, and you can shoot things like the starry sky, if you can actually find a clear sky in Delhi at some point or wherever you stay, lucky you. And you can do star trails, etc, etc. The primary camera on this smartphone is really incredible. It's surprising how, in the wake of Huawei pretty much having exited the smartphone business, well, they haven't exited the smartphone business, but their smartphones have now become non-existent in India, and the one thing they were known for was camera innovation. So that hole left behind by Huawei is now being filled in by other Chinese players like Oppo with their Find X3 series, Vivo with the X60 Pro and the X60 Pro Plus that's supposed to be coming out too. So it's very impressive that Android smartphones are no longer left in the dark just because one innovator has left the building. So we've got that. If we look at the ultra wide lens on this camera, well, here's the thing. You do get distortion, but you also get pretty impressive images, no doubt. I, for one, really like the ultra wide camera for the fact that in decent lighting, it's producing very impressive results. There is a little bit of flaring, yes. There is a little bit of chromatic aberration, yes, purple fringing, that is. But the really important thing is that the camera features autofocus, which means You are free to frame your subjects however you want, and that is a very critical part of good results from an ultra wide camera Vivo delivers. Then you also have a telephoto lens, which, well, some of you may find limiting since it's just 2x. The telephoto end of this camera is just 2x, but is actually more than enough when you want to shoot portraits. And that's also where the Zeiss specialty comes in. If you're shooting portraits from the VIVO X60 Pro, and given that you have a bokeh-able background, for example, if your subject is standing against a wall of fairy lights, or they're standing in front of a tree which has the sun streaming through it, the bokeh you'll notice is actually going to be very unique because it's a very signature Zeiss characteristic, and that's what you get. Not really sure if that is being implemented on hardware or software level, or if it's a marriage of both. Doesn't matter though, because that's the result you get, and it is still pretty impressive. In low light, I would recommend sticking to the primary camera because that's the camera that delivers good results, and stick to the bin mode because that's where you're maximizing the performance of this camera stack. Now, video mode also is extremely impressive, and that's where you see the gimbals really flex its muscles. We actually did a test last year where we took the VIVO X50 Pro and put that up against a number of cameras, including one which is mounted on a gimbal. And we concluded that the X50 Pro and the gimbal went toe to toe. This is pretty much the same because, let's face it, gimbals have also gotten better in the last 1 year. So the stabilization on the VIVO X60 Pro is the kind where you can just handhold without having to worry at all. Honestly, don't sweat it. It's that good. Two more aspects about the camera that I want to talk about is the super macro and selfies. Of course, Vivo selfies, hand in hand. But first, the macro. I was actually really impressed with the macro output that comes out of this camera. There's no doubt. Using the macro mode is actually a little annoying because in order to turn it on, you have to go through a number of steps. Leaving it on auto is a bad idea because then you'll start seeing the shift in your framing every now and then because the camera thinks you're trying to take a macro shot when genuinely you're just trying to get a little closer and not really into the macro scene. But the point is that if you've got enough light and if you can get the right frame where you're not casting a shadow on your subject, holy crap, such crisp and detailed macro shots are coming out of the VIVO X60 Pro. It's very impressive. Like, you guys call it a novelty if you will, but the point is that you're going to enjoy shooting with this camera in the macro mode. Once you've bored yourself to death with it, well, good, you still have it if you need it, right? So there's that's on the macro. Last but not the least, we've got the 32 megapixel front facing camera to talk about. And well, selfies has always been one of the stronger suits of Vivo smartphones. With the X60 Pro, you get a punch hole camera in dead center of the display towards the top, and the images coming out of them, well, they're actually pretty they're decent. They're not groundbreaking by any means, but at the same time they still lead the pack when it comes to quality of selfies. You have a host of options to make yourself look better. There's skin smoothing, there's face thinning and all of that. I personally just turn all of that off because I'm not a liar. So if you can choose to do that if you wish to, you're not going to feel like the selfie camera is going to let you down. Let's just put it that way. Now we're going to talk about the display of the VIVO X60 Pro, which is another fairly impressive feature of the smartphone. It's a 1080p panel, so like FHD plus, and it's got a refresh rate of 120 Hz, and it's an AMOLED screen with a touch polling rate of 240 Hz. So what that means is that you don't only have fast refresh rate, but also the panel is going to pick up every minute gesture from your finger thanks to the fast polling rate. And it, for the most part, does live up to all of those expectations. The navigation, the gesture response, the swipes, everything is super responsive and the UI is extremely smooth. But the real question is, how good is the tuning of this display? So as we would normally do, we fired up our Calman Ultimate, pulled out a color meter and figured out how this panel has been tuned by Vivo. Now the VIVO X60 Pro offers 3 primary color profiles. You've got professional, you've got bright, and you've got standard. The professional one is geared towards professional photographers and therefore conforms to the sRGB color space. The standard is a standard wide gamut color space, and bright refers to a profile where you have the panel be going all the way up to 1000 nits if needed in isolated areas, mind you, and well, the color accuracy is just all over the place. So let's first go over the standard color space. When we test our standard gamut, we see that we have 156% of the sRGB color space coverage, and the display P3 profile is covered by 104.84%, which is very impressive, which means that if you want to watch HDR10 plus content, which this phone is by the way certified to display, you would ideally want to keep it in standard. The only downside is that the white balance in this color profile is significantly on the bluer side and can sometimes be not only annoying but also hurtful to the eyes. Sorry, Vivo. Switch that up to the professional space and the characteristics change notably. For example, the color gamut gets noticeably reduced, with the sRGB color space being covered up to 98%, which is 100% fairly acceptable by the way, and delta E errors also drop significantly. In the professional color space, we have an average delta E of 2 with the maximum delta E of 3.9, and that too only for the blue color. Now, there are two specific shades of blue which are particularly problematic, crossing the 3.0 number, but more than that, the panel mostly behaves well. In the standard color profile, when looking at sRGB color space delta error, we see an error of 4 with a maximum delta E of 6.4. But if we were to measure the delta E for HDR color space, then the numbers change to 4.7 and 9.8. Overall, in the standard color profile, the display is not the most color accurate, which is all right because it's conforming to the idea of giving you brighter display, more vibrant colors, more number of colors for that matter. And as we see, it does cover 104% of the P3 color gamut. So overall, the display of the VIVO X60 Pro, well, Vivo could always push out an update that fixes the tuning of this panel, but as of now, the way it stands, it's definitely 100% functional for most people's needs. While almost everything on the VIVO X60 Pro is geared to impress you, and it actually does, one area where personally for me the phone falls short is the battery. It's got a 4200 mAh battery on the inside, which supports just 33 watts of fast charging. Frankly, the battery capacity would not have been an issue had Vivo resorted to a higher charging speed like 60-65 watts that we've seen in other smartphones like the OnePlus 9, 9 Pro, the Oppo series, etc. However, with 33 watts, you're limited to fairly slow charging speeds, with the phone going from 0 to 100% in about 90 minutes. While the 1080p resolution does not take much of a toll on the 4200 mAh battery, setting the refresh rate to 120 Hz does. In our usage, we get barely about a day's worth of heavy use on this phone, which includes at least 3 hours worth of phone calls, plenty of WhatsApp, about half an hour of Call of Duty Mobile religiously post-lunch team matches. And of course, there's also a healthy amount of YouTube and music streaming happening on the phone. Last but not the least, we're going to talk about the design of this phone. Now, typically my reviews tend to go from the most important feature to the least important feature. But with the VIVO X60 Pro, that is not the case. All of the features that we've talked about today are important, and the design of this phone is absolutely stunning. This phone is just 7.7 millimeters thin. It weighs 179 grams for the shimmer blue variant that we have here, and there's also a midnight black which is actually even lighter at 176 grams. Holding this phone just feels really nice. The satin back finish, this is AG glass by the way. The camera bump is pretty large, but it's elegantly designed, and the Zeiss branding on it makes you forgive whatever you may think of it. The flat top and flat bottom are also nice touches, and it's just a very nice utilization of clean straight lines and curvature. There is a curved display, of course, which is something that seems to be getting a lot of traction and has mixed usage. I'm not particularly fond of curved displays. I would have preferred a flat screen, but I can see what the hype is all about. The other thing Vivo has done really nicely is that there's a screen protector pre-applied to the display, and it actually goes edge to edge and does not interfere with the touch experience. You don't feel the edges digging into your fingers like you would on the OnePlus 9 and the OnePlus 9 Pro. So overall, the design of this phone is just stunning. It's a gorgeous phone, especially in the shimmer blue finish, and even the black one for that matter. I think we have one lying around in the office. I'm going to take a look. They do both look stunning. The back is completely resistant to fingerprints, and you know, who doesn't love that? So you can actually use this phone without a case if you wanted to. Speaking of the case, well, there is one included in the box. It's not TPU, it's hard plastic, and honestly doesn't really offer much in the form of protection because there is actually nothing on the sides. So the sides are completely exposed, and there isn't much of a lip to protect your display from cracking either. It's a gorgeous phone. You want to use it without the case, so I would recommend some caution when you do so. Other than that, it's a really strong attempt from Vivo to, you know, make a mark for itself in the high-end smartphone market, and it checks many of the right boxes. So that's our review of the VIVO X60 Pro. Definitely an amazing smartphone, great experience overall, and this review is coming straight from the OnePlus 9 Pro. So, I mean, that's saying something. Anyway, so thank you guys for watching this video, and before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel, and of course also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. As for me, hopefully, well, maybe you'll see me in the next one, maybe you won't, who knows.